Do we have any committee meeting requests or reports? Mr. Leonard.
In Mr. Engel's absence, I need to, we talked a few weeks ago about a budget schedule that would include budget hearings. Try and knock out the whole thing in one night rather than what we've always done in 2 nights. We've mentioned November 17th as a possible date for that at 5 p.m. and running. History would indicate we'll run till about 9 p.m. I wouldn't expect to go much later than that, but basically a 4-hour meeting instead of two 2-hour meetings. My sense was that everybody was supportive of that idea and has so far cleared their calendars. So Mr. Engel is not here. I guess I would ask that someone request or make the motion to have that meeting.
In light of this, do we have a motion for a
I'll make a
meeting
motion
on November
17th.
17th, starting at 5
p.m.
to have a finance committee meeting? And a second, Mr. Engel?
Second.
Sorry, Mr. Rusty.
Do we have to suspend any rule since we're having it at 5?
No,
The committee of the whole.
as a committee of the whole, you can have it at 5 o'clock.
And do you want me to just put that under just finance? Or do you want under sewer and,
No, it would just be a committee of the whole, not under any of the liaisons.
okay,
In the past, it's been under the finance liaison one meeting and then a combined water and sewer the other. I mean, we've gone back and forth committees versus liaisons. And I'm not suggesting at all how it's supposed to be. I'm happy with that. As long as we're all here and meeting at 5 o'clock, that works for me.
and it's the 17th?
November 17th, 5 o'clock. Did we just vote up and down?
No, all in favor.
Yeah, that's up and down.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
All those in favor of this committee meeting on November 17th at 5 o'clock, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we can put that on the calendar. And Mr. O'Donnell?
On a similar note, I too would request a committee of the whole meeting or recommend a motion for such pursuant to Rule 22. And this would be, the request would be for November 10th at 5 o'clock p.m. And it was at the request of a council member to review the 2021 budget priorities for street repaving.
And that's a request for a meeting of the whole on November 10th at 5 o'clock to review the 2021 budget prioritization for street paving.
I
We have
believe council received a list of those recommended streets earlier today.
Yes.
That'll be the main focus of discussion.
You need a motion for that?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
I'll make a
We have
motion.
a motion, Mr. Uresti, and a second, Mr. Corbett. All those in favor of this committee meeting on November 10th at 5 o'clock, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, then we'll be there at 5 o'clock. Any other committee meeting requests or reports? All right, do we have any comments from council? Mr. Mast?
Just wanted to share a little bit info from the Shade Tree Committee, because I think I've gotten to be on that this year, made a few meetings, and from what so far, we've had 28 trees purchased from John Demuth, 7 trees planted at Riverside Cemetery, 21 planted in various locations such as Deal Park, Kingsbury, the Reservoir, Laddie Street, Wayne Street, and Washington Street. And a lot of these trees were unfortunately planted to replace street trees that have not survived. And they were all planted by the Parks Department. And there was a tree planted at Deal Park on Thursday, October 8th in memory of Stephen Hannell through the Tree of Life program. The tree and the plaque were purchased through that. And I just want to give these folks in that department kudos, because what they're doing to keep these trees alive this year during the dry weather we had is amazing. And the fact that they only lost what they've lost so far, they're doing a great job. And Rob Sarrigan and everybody at the Parks Department is really pitching in to keep the Shade Tree Commission going and plant more trees and keep Defiance a beautiful, beautiful town.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Mast.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Waxler?
Yeah, Mayor, or Jeff, I don't know who, I had people out on Westwood Drive coming out. They're complaining about the vehicles at the old coke plant, you know, crossing Westwood there, that
Yep.
he's got stuff clear out by the road and they can't see to pull out of there, and it's starting to look like a junkyard in there, so.
That's Westwood and Baltimore, right? Westwood and Baltimore.
Yeah, right there, the old coke plant's
Yep.
where he's at.
All right, thanks. Gosh, I was just out there an hour ago.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from council? Okay. There's nothing before me this evening. We'll move on to the administration. Mayor McCann.
Couple things. First of all, I remembered my book, and I'll get to that in a moment. The only other thing I wanted to mention is last evening I received a text from a friend of our community, an old friend that I think I'd like to share with council and the community. It came from Rick Small, and maybe some of you are already aware of this, but Rick will be broadcasting again on 98.1 next Thursday, November 5th. That's Tiana's Wish Day for Christmas for Kids. So those of you that have missed Rick on the radio, that'll be next Thursday morning, and I think he'll be broadcasting live from Northtown Mall, but you might want to fact check me on that little tidbit. But I think we'll all be excited, and I'm sure Rick will be excited and have a good time doing what we miss a lot here in Defiance, having Rick on the radio. And from our book, from Mrs. Houck's third grade class last year, this is from Olivia. Olivia says, I want to be a teacher because I think teachers are cool. A teacher would wear shirts, jeans, or leggings and shoes. I want to be like Mrs. Carnes because she is nice. I will help kids learn and study. I want to teach first grade because the kids are fun. Is that correct?
That is awesome.
All right. A tool a teacher would use would be a computer, smartboard, pencils, and math games. And for those of you that don't know, I often defer to Mrs. Crutch on that because she was a school teacher for
Just a few years.
a few years. And let me just add, here in the last couple weeks, we've had a couple different chances to do WebEx or webinar meetings with some of Mr. Zipfel's high school current history class. We did a mock election. There was something in the paper yesterday with Mrs. Hohenbrinks and took part in that. Those kids were really excited. I visited last week with some Girl Scout brownies. Last night took a tour of some young Boy Scouts through City Hall here. I'm real proud of our kids here. They're very resilient. They're wearing their masks like they should. I'm certainly proud of our educators and our school administrators. We are getting the job done in our schools somehow. It seems like an impossible task, but we're getting it done, and I just wanted to commend our kids, commend our teachers, and commend our administration for what they're getting done. And I'm proud of all of them. That's all I have.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of items, housekeeping matters, and they revolve around expenditures of money. As a way to improve our connectivity, we've gone through a lot of different improvements with technology. So we do have an expenditure of money for exchange licensing, for emails, things like that. We're upgrading our system right now. The amount is $17,997.50. And then, keeping with the theme of technology, one of the things that we're also doing is using sensors to look at certain streams within the city of Defiance, and our wastewater division is doing that. We are now moving some of those sensors and working with some new ones in a way to look at our watershed approach, but we are also have an expenditure of money to update our model and some sensor technology, and that amount is $19,990. So just to keep up with informing council some of those expenditures, those are the two we have for this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Donnell.
I have nothing for you tonight.
Mr. Leonard.
Just one thing, I would like to update council on a recent bond sale that we had a few weeks ago. Council approved four ordinances to issue bonds, about $1.7 million in new money and not quite $6 million in refunding of some old debt that we had on Muni Court and some other things. It was about a little over $7 million issue. That sale took place a couple weeks ago and we closed on it last Thursday. And when we had talked about the initial projections, we were speculating that we might see an interest rate of 1.6%. With about $270,000 worth of savings over that 10-year period. The actual rate came in significantly lower. I think that our folks were even shocked. The rate, again, just over $7 million for 10 years. It was a 1.01% interest rate. And it bumped that projected savings from $270,000 to a number closer to $450,000. So
That's good.
timing was good.
Yeah.
Well. That's all for now.
Oh, thank you. That's good, though. We have 4 items for consideration this evening.
Second reading as amended by caption only, an ordinance amending section 1169.10 D8 of the codified ordinances of the city of Defiance, Ohio by restricting drop-off boxes.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. As some of you have pointed out, we have a section 1169.10 D8 of our planning and zoning code that regulates these clothing drop-off boxes for clothing and other items, I should specify. And there are criteria for a property owner to have those boxes on his or her property. The problem with that is, and the displeasure that you had expressed is we have to wait until it gets bad before we step in and act. So on our September 8th meeting, you had asked me to draw up legislation that would restrict or prohibit these boxes. And that's what we did. And for that, at this last meeting, Mr. Engel moved to eliminate the drop-off boxes within the municipal limits in their entirety, with the exception of property owned by nonprofit organizations. And the exemptions will keep the city clear of any First Amendment, Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act lawsuits. Say if you have allow a school to have one, but not a church, or one church and not another church. Just want to stay clear of that, that tripwire, and recommend that you treat all nonprofit organizations the same. One addition that I made from the draft that you may have seen previously was that I enabled the city to certify any costs and expenses for removing a drop-off box to the county auditor as a lien on the property. So anything that we spend removing will attach to the property as a lien. We will be authorized to take such action. And I made that effective January 1 of 2021. That gives the property owner some time to adjust to these new regulations.
All right. Thank you. Any questions or comments from council? Mrs. Crutch?
Just a question. Right now, how many of these boxes are in charitable, religious, or educational places?
I only know of one,
Just at
and
the
that's at
junior
the
high?
school property.
There's two over at, I'll say the 1918 campus, Mrs. Crutch,
Right, the.
Back
the
behind.
white one.
on Don Miller Drive.
Mhm.
And then there are two or three on the high school campus. And I think maybe two more over on the elementary campus. They're all on school property, to answer your question. Mr. O'Donnell's right. The only place we have them is on Defiance City School property, but there's multiple boxes, all by the same vendor.
Those are all by the same vendor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Waxler?
No further questions, motion to suspend the call.
We have,
Second, sir.
if we have no other questions, we have a motion to suspend and call Mr. Waxler. Second, Mr. Corbett?
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
And Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
And
Motion to approve.
Motion to adopt. Mr. Corbett?
Second.
Mr. Mast?
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
No.
And Mrs. Crutch?
No.
Now we have four, three against, two against. And that ordinance is approved.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the conveyance of municipal property located at River Street to the Community Improvement Corporation.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Thank you. As you may well know, the city's property needs are not static. They happen to change from time to time, and there are some situations where we might sell one piece of property and consolidate property in other areas or around another division, and there might be another time where we go out and acquire a piece of property. You all have been through that with us. Currently, the impound lot that the city police department uses to store tow-away vehicles or vehicles that may have been used in a crime situation is over on River Street near the Baltimore Street corridor. And if you go over there, it's just, I mean, it's basically an open lot. You could drive on there tonight and check it out if you wanted to, and nothing would restrict you from going on that property. It's near the water treatment plant, but it's not really connected to any city property. It's off by itself. And this proposal before you is to convey that parcel to our CIC here for urban redevelopment under that exception, under section 721.28 of the Ohio Revised Code. And then the CIC will explore conveying that, once they have it, to an end user for that kind of economic development. Mr. Hayes is here with his successor, and he plans to pursue that with his board of directors, excuse me. And the city would apply the proceeds of this sale, and the proposed sale price is $20,000, to the cost of constructing a new impound lot on some property that the city owns off Jackson Street. We call it the fish hatchery property. And that would pay for fencing all around the impound lot, perhaps a camera. And what it would do is enable the PD to keep their evidence more secure and also protect the integrity of of the felony prosecutions that the Defiance County prosecutor handles. Obviously, you don't want any you don't want to give the defense bar any openings with the chain of custody. I'm sure you know about that, Mr. McMaster. It would enable us to improve our police ability to serve their law enforcement functions, and would also mainly would turn the current impound lot, which is city owned and sitting vacant at the moment, potentially into some kind of income producing property.
Thank you. Do we have questions from council? With
No further questions, motion to suspend and call.
We have a motion to suspend and call. Mr. Corbett?
Second.
Second, Mr. Esty?
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
And Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Crutch?
Second.
Second, Mr. Hancock?
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
And Mr. Mass?
Yes.
This motion is adopted.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the purchase of 4 network servers and related components and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Leonard?
Yes, thank you. I want to take a few minutes, if you'll indulge me, to explain a little bit about what's happening with CARES Act funding, and we've talked briefly previous meetings about some of these things that will be coming before you, and it's an awful lot of money, and not everything is going to come before you because we have the $25,000 threshold for an ordinance coming to council, but I've handed out a table of information, and I'll go over it with you quickly. Early on in the pandemic, our fire department received money that was titled First Responders Relief. I believe it was a part of the CARES Act, but it was actually issued by Health and Human Services rather than FEMA, which has been responsible for issuing most of the CARES Act money. That money came to the fire department based solely on the fact that they are a Medicare billing service provider through their EMS runs. They received $21,666, and they have been able to utilize all of that funding to purchase personal protective equipment, rescue supplies, sanitizing equipment for the squads, UV kind of disinfectant for those vehicles. There was a lot of latitude in what they could use that money for, because almost everything they do is in the name of health and first responders, and those folks are at risk of exposure to the coronavirus on a daily basis. That money has all been expended up to this point, or accounted for. Subsequent to that, we've received now 3 rounds of CARES Act funding. They're identified in the next 3 columns. They total about $915,000. And fairly strict stipulations from the federal law that came down as to how that money can be used. And I'm not going to go over every dollar amount in here, but I would like to indicate or highlight that early on in the pandemic, we had a lot of folks either working from home or staying home on paid administrative leave. It was an effort to thin the workforce on site, in keeping with social distancing practices that were certainly at the time being recommended and required even by the administration in Columbus. We had paid administrative leave. We had extended sick time that we were required to provide to our employees over and above the pool of sick time that they normally would earn. And that is a reimbursable expense to the city. And there were a few instances where we used FMLA, which the federal government also provided that required that we provide extended periods of FMLA beyond the normal 12 weeks. And actually on a paid basis, a couple of weeks paid and the balance, I believe, at 2/3 pay. So FMLA is typically not a paid leave benefit, but under the conditions of this grant, it was to be paid and it is reimbursable. So a big chunk of those first two CARES Act rounds, the total about $315,000, were to reimburse ourselves for those wages and fringe benefits related to those three items. Couple of other things that ate up the balance of that money. We were paying for, I think you're all familiar somewhat with, we were having our wastewater, we were having samples from our wastewater plant tested by an outside agency who was kind of doing an experimental analysis to see if they could accurately determine COVID cases in the area, in the service area to that wastewater plant. I'm not going to pretend to be able to analyze those results. That'll be for a totally different discussion. But we were paying for that lab work to be done, and about $14,000 we paid before someone else, I believe Ohio State University, came along and offered to do the same testing at no cost to the city. But we were paying, and that was all reimbursable, again, against this grant. And then a couple of other smaller items that rounded out the balance of the first two rounds. Then a few weeks ago, when we kind of thought we're in good shape, we got all of our CARES Act money spent, we got hit with an even bigger dollar amount. Round three was nearly $600,000. And we have been spending a fair amount of time to try and account for how we can use that money within the requirements of the Act. And two items that I've highlighted on this sheet are directly related to the two ordinances, the one we're discussing now and the next one. $66,605.96 for purchase of 4 network servers. These 4 servers would be located at City Hall, water plant, wastewater plant, and the service building. They replace servers that now are aged, running out of storage, questionable reliability. One thing that we found, well, let me back up and say, first of all, the CARES Act money, there's a lot of latitude when it comes to technology, accommodating remote work, accommodating communications, accommodating virtual meetings, all of which we've struggled with. We have sketchy connections here in the building, we have slower speeds, we have storage issues, and these 4 units are aging, and our IT, our network administrator, Jake Lambert, welcomes the opportunity to update all of that equipment. It will help speed up our connections between those facilities and City Hall. So we have kind of an interconnectivity component to what we do, where we're communicating with ourselves among all the city facilities. There are other aspects that aren't addressed in this ordinance, but are addressed in some of the other items here, where we're looking to beef up the speed that we have coming into this building, internet connections. We've had many WebEx type meetings where you lose sound, you lose video, this kind of thing, where so much of this money was designed to improve those things, and not only to see us through the shutdowns, the lockdowns, the slowdowns that we have in place now with this pandemic, but potentially for the next pandemic that comes along, which undoubtedly is going to happen. So
That's comforting.
that's not an official government statement. There are other items that we're working on through the technology aspect. They don't all meet the threshold to bring ordinances to you. Much of what we've talked about among ourselves with division heads and Jake are itemized on here. There are a number of items that are listed as pending because we're either debating whether we should go that route or seeking prices still. At the end of the day, we hope to be able to spend all of the $936,000 that the city has received. The last item on the list I have kind of flagged as if permissible. We are of the belief that we might be able to use unspent dollars at the end of the day to pay for first responder wages. We are investigating that as to be sure that it will be an allowable expense. Have reason to believe that it will be, but we're not completely convinced yet. Actually, the law director raised some concerns to me this afternoon, and we're going to do some more due diligence on that. But in any event, happy to entertain questions on this. Look it over in your spare time going forward. I'll update it as we continue to meet, and as I fill in some of the blanks, I'll continue to provide you with updated copies.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions or comments from council, Mrs. Crutch?
Can some of this money be used for, I see the council chambers and conference room upgrades. And I know that when I went to the police station, their conference room could really use some updating. I mean, I remember all the chairs were all different, some had holes in them. So I didn't know if it was something that we could do for our police department. And I know even when you go into the building, they've had issues with water leaking on the front windows and things like that. So I didn't know if there was something that we could kind of slide in there for the police
The
department.
condensation on the windows, that's probably not something I would try and justify, but certainly every facility that has a conference room, we are in fact getting, they'll be equipped the same. We'll have a console, a tabletop console that accommodates these WebEx type meetings, teleconferencing or conferencing, not teleconferencing, that's almost
Right,
old fashioned, isn't it?
Yeah.
They'll all be getting large screen TVs. Similarly, we'll be replacing these screens in the council chambers with large screen TVs, like 75-inch TVs. Again, we're trying to improve the way we're communicating with the public who is generally not able to attend the meetings in public, at least for the foreseeable future. All those kind of things are justifiable expenses. And yes, the training room, the conference room at PD that they share with fire, that is getting a full update, as will the conference room at the service department, water plant, sewer plant, and they'll all be equipped the same. In some cases, we'll be looking at furniture as well, but it's primarily technology related. But
That's why I wondered, even like when you walk into the building, the first people they see, that little room that I can't think of the names. The two women are dispatchers or whatever, I see their chairs are not as nice and whatever, and I just wondered if there's something that we could do to upgrade that area for them, or, of course, I'm on buildings and land, so I've checked out a couple of these places, and I just think that sometimes we kind of
all of the
neglect that.
furnishings in the conference rooms, we can certainly accommodate, I
Okay.
think, under this funding source. The dispatch area, they ought to buy those ladies new chairs if they need them, but that would be
Right.
separate from this CARES Act.
Okay,
fund.
that wouldn't be something there. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes, just wanted to ask for justification. Are we making sure that we're following all that criteria? If we do go ahead and move forward with an item, and it doesn't qualify, how does that fall into play? I believe we have to work with this through December 31st, I think is the deadline, if I'm not mistaken. And what happens, I guess there's an additional question. What happens to, let's say we're getting a large TV, 75-inch, 200-inch, whatever size it may be. How do we dispose of the current equipment at that point? Do we put it on gov deals? Do we have a big garage sale? How does that come into play with the CARES?
So for starters, whether these expenses are allowable under the CARES Act is our number one concern. That's what we debate and contemplate. So what's happened is every city in Ohio, the state of Ohio, and every state in the country has been given given an incredible amount of money in a very short period of time with a very short window in which to spend it. So people like ourselves are racking their brains to find justifiable ways to spend this money. It might fly in the face of your principled beliefs that we should just be spending this money on anything we can rather than sending it back. But my sense is Columbus doesn't want the money back. My sense is Washington doesn't want the money back. They want it to be used. We have it, and we have as many justifiable expenses as we can come up with. But that is our number one criteria. Is this going to pass muster when we get audited? So number two, you are correct. These dollars have to be spent by December 31st. I have listed on here a squad, a new ambulance as a possible expenditure, and I think it would be an acceptable expenditure. I know other communities who are buying those kind of vehicles. At this point, we have to ask whether we can take delivery by 12/31. And I would hate to commit to that and then find that we can't get delivery by 12/31, because the other deadline we're working with is these funds have to be spent by the end of the year. They actually have to be encumbered, committed by November 20th. On November 20th, anything that's not committed, we literally have to send back to the county, who will then return the money to the state, who will then reallocate it again. They want to have November 20th as the deadline so that they have at least some period of time before the end of the year to reallocate those funds to other communities that might be able to use it. So, thirdly, any equipment that we purchase, say replacing these screens, we would either try and find other uses within the city for this kind of equipment, or certainly would make it available on Gov Deals for sale. I don't believe that would impact, I don't believe that we would owe the proceeds of those sold items back to the federal government. That would be really into the weeds. I would have to check on, but I doubt it.
Okay.
Lastly, the mechanism by which we will be audited for the CARES Act funding will be through the course of our normal financial audit that we have every year. So the auditors that we have on site will be adding CARES Act to their list of things to look at, and their number one job will be to scrutinize whether they were appropriate expenditures under the law.
Thank you.
Presumably, John, if there's something that we've spent that is deemed not appropriate, we would presume that we would need to return that money a year from now when that audit is taking place. And so any money that we save or are able to pay ourselves back for some of these expenses that we've already incurred, we would probably be wise to hold on to until such time as we're got the green light that we don't have to return any of it. But our primary goal would be to not be in a position where we have to return any of it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Waxler?
Have we thought about cruisers in this at all?
Cruisers, the eligibility for cruisers was vehicles that had the hard shell back seats and separation between the front and the backs. All of our cruisers currently have that already, so we couldn't justify it as a new feature to a vehicle, so we have not pursued that any further.
Okay, I'm just wondering where we was at there.
Yep.
Okay.
No further questions, we'll suspend the call.
If we have no other questions, we have a motion to suspend and call.
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
And Mr. Math?
Yes.
And we have a motion to adopt. Motion to adopt, Mr. Waxler.
Second.
Second, Mr. Hancock.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Math?
Yes.
And Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
This ordinance is approved.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the purchase of an automated external defibrillator and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Leonard.
Yes, thank you. So, I'm not gonna repeat that whole conversation, but this is the other yellow highlighted item on the table you've been provided. Each of our squads carries an automated defibrillator. Throughout the city, we have wall-mounted portable AEDs. The ones on the squads are the professional versions. Majorly important piece of equipment on our squads. They not only monitor a patient's condition and vitals, but they actually forward that information, say, to an ER while a squad is en route, so that the people standing by at the hospital have that information as soon as we hit the door. It's sophisticated equipment. We have one of these on each of our squads now. We have one that is at the end of its serviceable life. It's no longer being supported by the manufacturer. It would have been probably on Chief Wilkins' request to be replaced in about a year, but it certainly meets the criteria and is an eligible expenditure for CARES Act funding, so we're making a request to make that purchase in this ordinance. I would also add just quickly, Mr. Leonard in his report had identified the Exchange server, which houses all of our email. And that's an item on this list as well. It's not highlighted because there's not an ordinance for it, but it's the $17,997 item on the table.
Mr. Waxler.
What's the age of the second defibrillator? I mean, is it somebody will be looking at both of them now or not?
I apologize, I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
We could certainly look at it.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I'll be honest with you, Mr. Waxler, I think if it was nearing that Chief Wilkins would have said something.
right,
we
but
can-
if we got the money, I was
We
going
can
to
check and
next
bring,
year.
we can check
Yeah,
and
well,
bring
it
another
makes sense to
ordinance.
replace two. Yeah, we'll follow up on that.
I mean, I understand you probably want to keep them a year off each
Yep.
other, so you always got one, but, you know.
Any other questions? What are council's wishes?
No further questions, motion to suspend the call.
We have a motion to suspend and call Mrs. Crutch.
Second.
Second, Mr. Corbett.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mrs. Crotch?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
And Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
We have a motion to adopt.
Motion adopted.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Mass. Second, Mr. Waxler.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
And Mrs. Crotch?
Yes.
And this motion is approved. This ordinance is approved. All right. With that, do we have any letters or any emails, any messages from citizens? Mrs. Crutch.
I received a text from Kenneth Adkins, I put my glasses on here, 313 Scyther Street from Defiance, Ohio. And he wanted to personally thank Mr. Sean O'Donnell and all the council members that voted for the golf cart rules. He's a 71-year-old citizen of Defiance and not going to be on the streets every day, but if I choose to ride my golf cart in the city of Defiance, I now can do it legally. I hope the city council will consider adopting Jackson Street for golf carts in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Crutch. And any other citizens' concerns that you were asked to share? All right. Before we adjourn for this evening, just a reminder, next, and it probably didn't occur to anyone today, next Tuesday's election day. So we won't be having a city council meeting on Tuesday, November 3rd. Just a reminder that we're here on Tuesday the 10th at 5 o'clock for the streets meeting of the whole, and the following week on the 17th, we're also here at 5 for the water and sewer and the finance committee meetings. Do we have any questions or comments before we take a motion? Do we have a motion to adjourn this evening?
So moved.
So moved. Do we have a second? All those in favor of adjourning for this evening, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right.
I don't know what
explain to me why you're involved.
Yeah.
The committee of the whole wasn't meant to be just a concentrated
I will.
thing.
Hi, Don. I'm
You
Erica.
can count the pick when you start, it wasn't
Yeah, tomorrow.
disappointed.
Sure.
Three sidewalks guy.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Well,
One
it's
of
gonna
the
be a committee
things
of the
is
whole.
that I think that
I'm in your.
if the business
That enables you to
would
meet
have
outside the
that,
council.
followed by
We're
Sean
not changing that.